to vary, because when I first started this practice, my points of attention are completely different than what my points of attention, well, no, not completely, but they're a little bit different. So this practice has basic alignment, and that is basically just basic practices. Mindful walking, something I call the 4 modes practice, which is when we pay attention to the transitions between walking and standing, or standing and walking, standing and sitting. So I have 2 major practices that I offer in basic alignment, and it's box walking and the 4 modes practice. When we get into the counterbalance phase, that is when we start to redirect our thinking back to the second ring of power, or back to tricks of attention. So it's not cognitive behavioral therapy, because we're not focused on behaviors, and we're not just going from one type of thinking to another type of thinking. It may seem that way, but there's something different that we're doing with our thought that makes it different than those other forms of psychotherapy. And then we go into warrior training, where it's just full embodiment. And then we go into seers training, where it's just time to cut the bullshit. So if you're asking about my tricks of attention, they have changed throughout these phases. And that's kind of a reason for the different phases. And it's also just to show that there can be a natural progression to this, although the phases are not linear. So, Jenny, you have some background in spirituality and mindfulness. You may be able to just jump right in to warrior training or counterbalance, and then you just find the basic alignment stuff interesting. Some people have never considered that they are not just their thoughts. They have identified fully with the stream of thought. So basic alignment is going to be square one. So in basic alignment, we start with very basic tricks of attention. And the most basic tricks of attention are going to involve your common 5 senses. But it will also include your peripheral nervous system, because if you pay attention to your feet, then you are paying attention to your peripheral nervous system, or the nerves that exist outside of the brainstem and the brain itself. So body awareness, whether it's a focus point, your feet, or eventually your entire body. So I break up, essentially I break up, I don't like the word journey, but I break up what I've done based on where I was working. And I have a segment now at the dispensary that I'll be talking about eventually. But I have the movie theater, where I started to put things together. And then I have the restaurant, where I began to fully embody. And then when I started teaching, that's how this all started to come together. And even my own practice solidified, along with the ability to offer the practice to other people. Does that make sense, Jenny? And I'm getting to your answer, I swear.
That does make sense, yes.
Okay. So in the beginning, when I first started this practice, my tricks of attention would be very low-hanging fruit. It would be my internal body, because I was starting to practice Tai Chi, so I had an internal point of attention. But then I started to steal things from books that I was reading, and I didn't care. I just wanted peace. So I started to steal their ideas. Don Juan was telling Carlos Castaneda to pay attention to shadows. So I started to pay attention to shadows. I started to use peripheral vision or defocused vision. I started to breathe in a certain way. I started to walk in a certain way. So there was a story that I would tell where all day I was just walking on blue and purple tiles. And there's no other reason other than my mind isn't used to doing that. So if I want to do that, I have to pay attention. And so in order for it to be a trick of attention, it cannot be habit. It has to be something that your mind is simply just not used to doing. And it doesn't have to find it interesting necessarily. That's not a key attribute. Although if your trick of attention is interesting to you, you're more likely to remember it and eventually hold it. So Yesterday, I actually gave I think I talked for 45 minutes about hydrostasy. Hydrostasy is my practice now, and it exists a little bit independently of the tea practice, but it comes from the tea practice. It's the same thing. I want this to exist independently because nobody has to do it. Nobody has to put their mind where I do. I'm just offering it. And if it can be helpful, awesome. If you want to take some things and leave other things, awesome. If you want to do it exactly like I've done it, I think that's available as well, because it will still be different. It has this interesting blend of uniqueness to you, but also it's the same principle that you and I are following, so it's going to have a similarity to it as well. So, tricks of attention while driving. I would pay attention to the sky. When I walk outside, and it's not, just to find it beautiful, but it is. I do find the sky attractive, but I'm not doing it for that reason. I'm only doing it because my mind isn't used to paying attention to the sky when I would walk outside. There's no predators in the sky. My mind isn't concerned with it. It's seen it before, so it wants to devalue it, in a manner of speaking. The brain is an instrument of memory. It wants to take in new information, make it old information, and then go on to the next thing and learn. We came into this world doing that, and it's what our brain is fundamentally hardwired to do. So I go with that principle and that dynamic rather than against it. So these days, if you were to ask me at the dispensary, Ernest, where is your mind? Right now, as I talk, I put my attention on my throat. Because when I'm not talking, I have my attention on smooth breathing. And if you were to tap me on the shoulder at work and say, Ernest, where is your mind in this exact moment? There's a 98% chance that I am paying attention to how I breathe without manipulating it. So I'm not trying to alter it. I'm not trying to belly breathe. I'm not trying to, do anything with it necessarily. I can, but that's a different practice. That's not smooth breathing. That's manipulated breathing. And there can be a purpose to manipulating your breathing. If you're experiencing some trigger from PTSD, and for whatever reason, a deep belly breath, maybe reverse abdominal breathing or something like that, is going to be very relaxing and beneficial. We'll do that. That's great. But what I'm talking about is smooth, unobstructed breathing, where I am aware of it. I am collaborating with it. In a sense, I am as much my breath as I am my thoughts. Those are both just aspects of me. So when I'm paying attention to my breath, it's similar to when I'm paying attention to my thought. I begin to, in a manner of speaking, identify with the breath, with the spirit, if that makes sense. So if we're talking about where is my mind these days, I can pretty much maintain attention on my breath awareness all day long, even when I talk. Like right now, when I talk at work, sometimes I lose it. And that's, because of my experience. I had a lot of social anxiety and social, issues in terms of getting along with people and finding the best way to collaborate with people. So those are my battlegrounds. And every now and then I can feel myself going away from peace. And then I just redirect back to the practice, and I'm right back where I want to be. So one of them is a smooth breath. One of them is defocused vision. And it's not a habit. My eyes don't automatically defocus. I have to choose to carry peripheral vision with me as I go throughout the day. I pay attention to movement and stillness and the contrast between the two. So anything that's moving, I will start to kind of pay attention to, not to analyze it, not to judge it, not to do anything with it, other than my mind just isn't used to paying attention in that way. And the biggest difference, Jenny, between my practice 2 or 3 years ago and now is that I maintain these points of attention all day long without forgetting. I don't really forget my body awareness in space and time. And that's called proprioception. Your ability to sense that you have a body in this thing that we call space and time on Earth, in your environment. You can feel pressure when the pressure in the room changes. That's all proprioception. It's all of our senses working together to give us a sense of physicality. I can actually pay attention to that. I can put the light of my attention on my body and I can feel the proprioception. If I go back into repetitive habitual thought processes, I lose that connection. If I'm not paying attention to it, it does not exist for me. Am I still connected to the universe? Yeah. But if I'm not paying attention to it, it doesn't have any significance in my experience in terms of my attention and my deliberate nature. So I have those, defocused vision. I'm paying attention to my smooth breath. I'm paying attention to my entire body in space and time. And as Lisa pointed out, my practice has resulted in a mind that feels relaxed. And I don't know how to really explain this feeling other than light. My mind feels very light. It feels very agile. It feels very playful. It feels very chill. I'm ready to joke. I'm ready to be serious if necessary. My mind is just really ready to adapt and free to move. And I pay attention to that feeling. So now that that feeling is there, I pay attention to that feeling, and that feeling grows in my experience, and it leads me to the essence. So when I'm working at the dispensary, I can feel this timeless essence. As I'm driving down the interstate with almost no traffic, like it's 6 o'clock in the morning. There's no cars on the interstate right now, other than me and like two other people. So there's just this essence of what it's like to travel, what it's like to have an interstate, what it's like to move at 70 miles an hour. I'm feeling the essence of the moment, which I would describe the essence as the totality of the moment happening now. The more I feel, the more I can feel its totality. And it's really difficult to talk about. It's very difficult to communicate, but that's what makes it artful. That's what makes the expression so fun and so beautiful, because as human beings, we love to communicate. We want to share how we feel. That's one of the innate aspects of being human. We are social creatures, or at least to my observation, that's what I've observed, that human beings in general are very social, communicative type of creatures, and that's what we want to do. So, and Lisa really pointed this out, I think it was maybe a couple weeks ago, but I have actually learned to place the flashlight of my attention and awareness on the feeling that has resulted from my practice. So this feeling of peace, I'm very specific with my words, and it's not because my definition is absolutely correct. But if I can be consistent with my words, every time I use the words, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So if I say tree, you know what I mean. If I say straw, you know exactly what I mean. There's no confusion. So the word peace for me is a feeling that results when the mind is not resisting the present moment, when it's light, when it's agile, when it's engaged, when it feels free. There's this feeling of peace. In an enlightened society, I don't expect that there would even be a word for this, because we're born this way. We would never create a word for the opposite of peace, which is turmoil or a mind that is at war with itself. So the feeling of peace is something that I can feel. And it is the result of my practice, of doing the practice. But I can put the light of my attention and my awareness on that feeling of peace. And that's actually how I know that I'm starting to go back to dysfunctional cognition, because I start to lose the peace. And if I can't feel the peace anymore, I'll stop everything that I'm doing and I'll go back to my practice, no matter what it is. I don't care if I got a patient right in front of me, or, I got the CEO of fucking Jushi LLC. If I feel myself going away from peace, I'm going to call a timeout, because nothing I'm doing is going to be in alignment with my desire if I'm ultimately fighting the present moment. Conscious creation exists in the moment happening now. So if I want to consciously create, I have to be consciously aware of the creation process as it occurs. And that's why Abraham says that there's always a step right in front of us. This practice really focuses on that step right in front of you. Just do energy. Yeah, I got a vision. Yeah, there's things that I want, and my desire exists. But if I'm not putting one foot in front of the other, I'm standing still. And it doesn't matter how much I think about an imaginary future. If I don't put one foot in front of the other, it's not going to just come to me. The possibility of it comes to me. It exists all around me. So there is infinite potential that I'm swimming in. And the moment I decide to put one foot in front of the other, the energy slides to me as I slide to it, and then we meet in the middle. And that's called effortless conscious creation. But I still have to do something. There's still an action step, if that makes sense. So, and this is what Lisa pointed out, but I have learned to place my attention on the feeling of peace, on the feeling of a relaxed mind, on a feeling of the essence of the present moment, and something new that I'm calling source or wellspring. I like the word wellspring because source can get confusing. It can be confusing because people associate different things to that word source. And if everybody associates something different, then I don't know what we're talking about. It can be very difficult to communicate if every time I say fork, you're thinking about a bird. And every time I say chicken, you're thinking about a kitchen utensil. It's going to be very difficult for us to communicate that way. So does that make sense, Jenny? So definitely my tricks of attention have changed. My points of attention have changed over time. But that's the example of where I put my mind these days.
Very cool.
Yep. And I see we got some more folks joining. Do you guys have any questions about that? Jenny just asked, where is my mind and what are some of my most useful tricks of attention? But back in the day, I had all kinds. Every time I would walk through a doorway, that's an opportunity for mindfulness. Every time I would look out of a window, I would call it a window made of time, where I would notice the inside and the outside of the window, and I would hold them both in my cognition. I started to pay attention to shapes. I started to pay attention to geometry. I started to pay attention to light sources. Where is the light? When I say I'm a light worker, I don't mean that figuratively. I don't mean that, idealistically. I mean that as I go throughout the day, my mind is interacting and working with the light in the room. And it leads to different types of insights or different types of ahas. And, those ahas are interesting. And sometimes I write them down and sometimes I communicate them. But ultimately, it just leads to a feeling that affirms the practice, if that makes sense. So those are some of my old tricks of attention. Sound, listening behind me, specifically when I would do fox walking. Every time, I've had days where every step that I took, I made sure to pay attention to my feet and the heel to toe process, where the heel touches first and then your walk, it kind of pushes off with the toe, if that makes sense. So I've worked at a restaurant where I paid attention to the cutting process, where I would feel into the knife and the cutting board, and I would be able to feel the wheels on the stand that I was cutting on. And then I would be able to feel the vibration of the refrigerator unit through the wheels, through the stand, through the nice handle. And I was sensing through objects all of a sudden. So those also became my deliberate points of attention. All that makes sense? Easy peasy. And the only real criteria, though, those are just some of mine. Other people, depending on their life situation, will come up with different tricks of attention. So I don't know, Jenny, you mentioned braiding hair. I'm never going to have my hair braided, most likely. And there's probably a good chance I'm never going to braid anybody's hair. But I can imagine that there are an infinite amount of braiding hair. There's a time for mindful attention. You could probably create techniques around that activity. And that's the uniqueness of this practice is we're all just a little bit different around your individual lifestyle and things that you like. So for example, let's say you enjoy stars and you find stars really interesting. Well, I would make a practice that at night, every single time I walk outside, I'll check into the stars. I'll look up at them. I'll say, here I am in this life, in this body, I am present. And then I'll keep the stars in my cognition as I go, you know, I guess if I'm outside, as long as I'm outside. But even during the day, when I walk outside and it's daytime, I look up in the sky and I can say, I still see the stars. It's just, they're just being drowned out by the sun. You know, the sun is emitting so much light, my eyes can no longer distinguish the stars, but they're still there. They're always shining their light on us, even if I can't see it. You see what I mean? So it can still be a point of attention. I can still check into it. Take whatever you like, whatever you enjoy, you know, whatever is presenting itself in your life experience. If your mind is not used to doing it, it will take on a deliberate quality. And that deliberate quality is where the power exists. And then very likely you will run up with something that I call the atrophy of awareness. The atrophy of awareness is a feeling of difficulty in doing a trick of attention because you and most people have never really done it before. I floated through my life experience for 30 years without pointing my attention on purpose. So when I started to do it, it felt very difficult to remember. It felt very difficult to maintain. And that's because I just wasn't used to it. I hadn't done it before. I had no practice in doing it. I had never felt the results of it. So I wasn't convinced through feeling that I wanted to do this. So in the beginning of this practice, you will come up against a wall that I call the atrophy effect. And it's just like a muscle. If you don't use a muscle, even the most basic movement is going to feel terrible. It's going to feel like work. It's going to feel like you're trying to control, but you're just lifting your arm. That shouldn't feel like work. You're not, you know, that's the way the arm was meant to move. So it's the same thing with our attention and our mind. Our mind was meant to do this. It was designed to do this. And we're just not used to doing it. So it feels difficult at first. It feels like work. But in the process of doing the practice, the atrophy effect is dissolved and it's broken up. And then before you know it, it's the opposite. It's preferred to be present. It's preferred to be checked in. It's preferred to have your mind on the present moment in such a way. And then the atrophy effect is pretty much in the rear view mirror, and you don't really have to worry about it anymore. It doesn't
Ernest,
feel like work. Yes.
Ernest, do you make a game of it then? Make a play of it? Your tricks of attention?
You know, I used to when I was first, you know, practicing and first starting out. In a manner of speaking, I did kind of create a game out of it. I did find that keeping score for my mind was a trap. So when I would start to keep score or I would start to count or I would do anything like that that was comparing and contrasting, then it was a trap for me and that didn't work very well. So I did definitely turn it into a type of game that I could play with my mind. I don't really approach it like a game anymore. Not for any real reason other than I don't know. I don't really need to. You know, I prefer to be engaged. I prefer the feeling of a mind that is light and agile and free and ready to learn. And you know, I'm ready to observe my own habits. I'm ready to see them, interact with them, redirect them, and dissolve them because I have them too. And the more that I do my practice, the more I discover habits that I didn't even know was there. And I don't have to declare war on them. I don't have to focus on them. I just have to continue to do my practice, and they will dissolve in the light of my awareness and my desire. And my desire is to be whole, it's to be complete, it's to be connected, it's to evolutionarily evolve. That doesn't make sense. Evolutionarily evolve, but to evolve. That's another purpose of all life, is to change over time and to become. I don't know if complex is the right word, but seemingly more complex. So the answer is yes, Ida. For a period of time, I did treat my tricks of attention much like I would treat a game. And if we were going to create tricks of attention for kids or for younger people, creating games out of it is actually genius. It's brilliant to do that. And if you find that helpful, then by all means, I would encourage it. If keeping score or winning and losing starts to feel like a battleground, then just don't do that. Don't do that part of it. That's not necessary. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But just to treat it more lightly is how I find it easier to treat it with a lightness rather than a seriousness, because the seriousness kind of put me off and made me feel like I had to be doing it a certain way. But when I approach tricks of attention with lightness, it becomes preferred for me.
Right. And one of the things that could help with the lightness of tricks of attention is that the trick of attention only needs to be to a degree. So it's not like we're de-arming a bomb at all times. If you're de-arming a bomb, you probably need a lot of focus. There's a lot of little wires that you don't want to cut the wrong one. So, that's a huge degree of focus and intention. And it's just not realistic that in the beginning we're going to have that degree or multiple points of attention all vibrating and moving at the same time. That can be a little bit unrealistic in the beginning. So another way that you can find the lightness of the practice is to keep in mind the fact that you only need to be engaged to a degree. It doesn't have to be, 10 points of attention, or that you're paying so much attention that you can hear a pin drop in a subway or something like that. You know what I mean, Ida? Does that make sense?
Yes, and that really helps. That really helps me personally, because if I have to get into too much must do attitude, it becomes heavier.
Right.
So to have it lighter is the way for me personally.
I can understand. Yeah. And so let me highlight the individual nature of this practice again, because maybe for Lisa, and I'm just picking on you, Lisa, for no reason whatsoever, but maybe Lisa wants it to be more serious. Maybe there's a lot going on in her life and she's just like, fuck it. I want peace. I want to adapt better. I want to make choices that are more in line with my desire and not just habitual biology or whatever. So she takes the practice more seriously and she approaches it like, I must do this. If I'm not doing this, I'm feeding the atrophy of awareness. So for Lisa's mind, taking it more seriously may be just what the doctor ordered. And I put doctor in air quote, that's just a phrase. But maybe for you, Ida, taking it more relaxed is just what the doctor ordered. So the principle is, at least to a degree, I am learning to maintain attention on the present moment. But you can do it really any way that you want to, as long as your mind isn't used to doing it. So remember my rubber band example. At the movie theater, I was snapping my wrist with the rubber band to stay present, and that became a habit. And one day somebody asked me what I was doing with the rubber band, and I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, you're snapping yourself, right? What are you doing that? And I didn't even know it. I was like, oh shit. So my trick of attention lost its deliberate edge. It lost its power, and it just became a habit. And so that's the only criteria, is once it becomes habit or conditioning, it is no longer a trick of attention. It's just conditioning and habit. There are certain things, I guess you could say, that will never become habit. Your breath. That is the hardwiring of the human body, that we can be aware of our breath and it can be automatic. That will always be your hardware. That's your hardwiring. The breath is autonomic, but it's also something that we can pay attention to and manipulate if we wanted to. That will always be the case. So whenever you place your attention on your breath, that is always going to be a mindful act of deliberate attention. What I recommend doing is being as light and gentle with that as possible if you want to maintain it through the day. Because if you are trying to manipulate your breath, that requires personal power. So the manipulation process requires a little bit of, and it may feel great, but I have not met a single yoga instructor, a single Tai Chi instructor who breathes from the belly for 10 seconds in and 10 seconds out all throughout the day as a deliberate act. So I don't see it happening. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I don't see it. And it just seems more reasonable to me that I can pay attention to my breath without manipulating it. And that's a whole lot easier than paying attention to the breath and then trying to change it and manipulate it. Again, there may be a circumstance, a call for that. Maybe, damn it, Lisa, I'm using you as an example again, but maybe you're swimming in the, oh no, Ida, you're swimming in the ocean and a shark comes up and your body goes into fight or flight. And then you get up on the beach and your body is still in fight or flight. And then you remember you're not in the ocean anymore. So you don't really need to feel crazy right now. So you start to do deliberate breathing, 10 seconds in, 10 seconds out, and you're calming yourself down. Fine. I'm not going to tell you how to float your boat, but there is a difference between manipulated breathing and a smooth, unmanipulated breath. Does that make sense? And that shows the difference in this practice, how everybody's practice can be a little bit different, but definitely following the same principles. The principles remain similar. Actually, the principles remain exactly the same. But how we express those principles can be a very unique thing.
I think also the breath is a good one as well, because when you're paying attention to your breath, it's a good indicator of when you are having unproductive thought. Because my breath changes when I have unproductive thought in my mind. So it kind of reminds me, hey, what's going on? Where's my mind now?
No, you're right, it does. And that works even better if there's less evaluation. Evaluation is just you talking to yourself again. You are attempting to communicate with you. You are saying words that you already know about a subject that you already know, about something that you're already feeling. So when we're talking to ourselves, we are attempting to describe experience and communicate to ourselves. And frankly, that is insane, especially when we do it unconsciously. If you're doing it on purpose, well, that might be a technique. Maybe you're saying something out loud to yourself as a part of a technique to sort things out. So I love what Shayna said. When you look at your breath and you can see that your breath is hurried, that your breath is uneven, that is probably a good indication of where you're going cognitively. You're probably going back to condition and habit. And I mean, you're a leaf at the mercy of the wind. Things may go your way and you may have a good day. Then again, shit may hit the fan and you have a devastatingly terrible day. If you're not paying attention on purpose, the mind is just a leaf at the mercy of the wind, waiting for a gust to blow it away. And that is not conscious creation. So I'm not interested in that. So if I do see my mind or I see my breath, it's very important not to go into a deep evaluation process. That's why when we get into the counterbalance practice, we start redirection. Is my thought repetitive? Redirect. And by redirect, I mean the rule of three, a mantra, two other points of attention, because I'm I'm being passive if I'm allowing unproductive cognition. If I'm entertaining unproductive cognition, I'm losing my breath awareness, just like Shana said. So that's an indication. I'm losing my feeling and my connection to the present moment. So that's going away. There's no essence. There's no relaxed mind. So the more I go into evaluations, the more I go into repetitive thoughts, the less I am connected to the world around me, the less I can feel it. So I'm now dumb, deaf, and blind to the seat of my experience because I'm too busy entertaining this cognitive bubble, this thought bubble. And it's important then when we see that to not go into a stream of evaluation. That's why I have the rule of three. That's all. I've done the evaluation for you. Is it repetitive? Redirect. Is it just a habitual way of thinking? Redirect. Is the thought making you feel unwell? Redirect. So you don't have to go into a long, convoluted, is this, I should be thinking, is it making you feel shitty? Then you should not be thinking that way. It is not serving you. It is not beneficial. It is not creative. It is not inspired. It is not new. It is not moving you towards that step right in front of you. So unproductive cognition is repetitive cognition. It is habitual cognition, and it is cognition that does not make me feel well. So I don't have to go into a long debate about it in my own mind. I can just observe these three factors in the beginning and say, oops, this is repetitive. I'm going back to my rule of three. This is habitual and repetitive. I'm going back to my rule of three. I can promise you, if it is repetitive and habitual, it will not make you feel well eventually. And so I need to redirect and go back to my rule of three. So being sure that we're not going too deep into evaluation, because evaluation is an attempt to control. It's an attempt to try to figure it out. It's an attempt to try to change, manipulate, and is just the mind's age-old habit of attempting to control. Evaluation to try to control. It's not necessary. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. To me, it does.
If you try to control, you will unconsciously create trying to control and trying to understand. So let's say, Karen, you just want to understand. You're always thinking about wanting to understand. You will create a life experience that is surrounded by and is built by wanting and trying to understand. Does that make sense? And before you know it, you're going to all these retreats, you're paying all this money, you're reading all these books, you're doing all of this self-help work, and then before you know it, you're doing shadow work, and then before you know it, you're paying Aborigine tribes in, Australia thousands of dollars to give you ayahuasca and tell you about yourself because you're trying to figure it out. That is conscious. It's unconscious because it's not, you don't really mean, that's not really what you want to do, but that is the creation process. That is how the law of attraction works. Where you place your attention, that is what you will create. If you place your attention on questions, you don't create answers, you create questions. If you want answers, you have to create space. And in that space, the answers will reveal themselves to you if you're paying attention. If you're not paying attention, then you're going to miss the answers. And very likely, you're just going to be creating the questioning mind to where everything is a question, 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 question. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. It's like the understanding's not with the actual information that you're trying to understand. It's not, it's actually in the doing of the practice of creating space. Because
Right.
you're constantly searching for the information to make sense. It's not going to align with you because you're not practicing it. So you're
Right.
not going to understand.
Right. And that goes back to the model of knowledge unto wisdom. Information and experience create knowledge or understanding. I can use Shana's experience to an extent, and I have a little bit of knowledge. And I might be able to exercise that unto wisdom as well. But experience is a crucial factor of knowledge. If I don't have experience, all I have is information, and information is not knowledge. Information is just information. It's bits of data. It's synaptic connections in your brain telling you that this is blue or that this is red. That's not necessarily understanding or knowledge. You have to experience blue. You have to experience red. And sometimes that experience can be shared. That's another beautiful thing about communication. So Shayna can tell me that red hot handles on a pan is going to burn my hand. And I have information on the laws of thermodynamics and the transference of energy, and I have felt heat before. So I have experience of my own in heat. I have experience that Shayna has shared with me, and that's that red hot handles are going to burn me. And then I have information. I've learned about this in school. I have books that talk about the laws of thermodynamics and what happens when molecules are moving rapidly and what that will do to molecules that aren't moving rapidly. So I got all that. But do I touch the hot pan? That's the question. If I still touch the hot pan, I was not very wise. I didn't express my knowledge and my understanding. But if I look at the hot pan and I remember, oh, Shayna told me about this, and I also know what pain feels like and what heat feels like, and I'm going to use my information and I ain't going to touch that shit. That's wisdom. I just expressed my knowledge unto wisdom. So if I don't do that wisdom part, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't have any tangibility in my experience. There are people walking around with loads of information, and they're walking around with loads of maybe even knowledge, experience, but they're not expressing that into wisdom because they're not the step right in front of them. There's no presence, there's no mindfulness. So there's no opportunity to be aware of what they're doing as the moment is currently unfolding. So it's really only half the battle. So wisdom is when the knowledge is expressed, the understanding is expressed. If I know that stepping in a mud puddle is going to make my shoe wet for the rest of the day, when it rains, I'm going to pay attention and I'm going to walk around the mud puddles. And that is wisdom. That was wise for me to do. Does that make sense? Wisdom is the action, the expression of knowledge. Knowledge is a combination of information and experience. And I'm not telling you what to believe with these words, but if you ever hear me talk about wisdom, then you know I'm not just talking about ideas and concepts, talking about an action, an expression. But if I'm talking about knowledge or understanding, then you know I'm talking about a combination of information and experience. If I have information on boxing, but I have never done it, I have no experience, I know nothing about boxing. I will get my ass handed to me in the ring. But if I practice, I get physical experience, and I have information, I can now share that knowledge with another person. And if I do good in the boxing ring, then I express my knowledge unto wisdom. It's a simple formula, really. But does all that make sense? And do you see how that kind of coincides with what Shayna was mentioning? And I've had my own experiences here at the dispensary where I have knowledge and I have experience, and then for whatever reason, and I don't have to search for the reasons, but I know I can see them. But I don't always express it unto wisdom, and that's the learning opportunity.
Yeah, sometimes you do touch that hot pan, and then
Sometimes I do.
Yeah.
I've accumulated 30 years of stupidity and unconsciousness. So every now and then I do touch a hot pan. I have accumulated certain habits, and so has everyone else.
It's like even when during my training process at work, we learned all this, all this stuff, and my boss would go through it, and she's like, "Do you understand?" And I'm like, "Yeah, in this moment, yes," because we go through so much information, and you have the knowledge there, but when you're actually doing it, sometimes you end up touching that hot pan, and when you touch that hot pan, and and it comes forth, that's when you know, it really sets in that wisdom of, you know, sometimes
Right.
before it sets in. But yeah.
Yep. Any questions, I guess, before we head out? So at 7:07, I start work at 7:15, so I do have to ride here in a minute. But hi, Viv. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Karen's. Thanks for hanging out. Any questions about any of this? When I get home today, I'm going to do all of we have 2 videos that need to be posted, 2 podcasts that need to be posted. So I'll be posting them on my website when I get home this afternoon. So you guys can watch the replays if you're interested. But are there any other questions or any comments or concerns? Anything I can help you with today, your practice? All right. Everybody's cool? All right, so today is Sunday. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Tomorrow we have our group study, and we're going to begin topic number 2, which is the golden mean principle. So all week we'll be talking about the golden mean principle, and that's the second aspect of T, the complete practice, but it's the second aspect of basic alignment. All right, so I'll see you guys tomorrow if you can make it at 6 o'clock, because that is live on Zoom. That's video. And then I think we do the podcast at 8:15 or 8:30. Yeah, I'll figure it out. All right, well, I will see you guys later, and I hope you have a good day. Thanks, Karens. Bye,
Bye.
Lisa. Bye, Viv.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Yeah, have a good
Have
one.
a
See you
good
guys
day.
later.
You too.
Thanks, everyone.